Yeah. Well, hello. How are you?
Good. How are you? Nice for you to
I'm
join
great.
us today. Great. So
Oh,
I,
thanks for having me.
no, anytime. So I really loved your short. I felt like you did a great job of capturing what anxiety and just social awkwardness and overthinking must feel like. So I just wanted you to
Oh, thank you.
explain like the process of creating the space in his mind. How are you able to create that space in Jack's head?
Um, yeah, so it's actually pretty funny. I like in the script, it's written as like the mind vault,
Hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
I always, in my own head, it feels like there's me who has like a nice, like almost like lazy boy,
Mm.
and I'm usually sitting in it, and then there's voices because that's visually a little bit kind of how it is in my head, right?
Hmm.
Um, but I wrote it as a mind vault. And when I was scouting locations, I was like, oh, I'll look for the inside of a bank vault. Like that makes sense, vault. And then
Hmm.
when I was scouting, I got inside a bank vault. Like there's this place where they in Burbank where they do kind of like little robbery shoots. And so I found like an actual bank vault and I went inside and they closed the door. I was like, oh, this is a room. Like
Mm.
without the door, the twisty thing, like it just
Yeah.
looks like a room and
Mm.
doesn't do anything that I wanted it to visually.
Yeah.
And so we looked at a few places. There was this like almost retro sci-fi place that we looked at that was closer. But once I found that electrical basement, it was the one that mimicked kind of the space in my head the most, right?
Mm.
Like kind of dingy, a little messy, uh, disorganized, but also there's some kind of order to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, and so when we got there, I was immediately like, okay, this is the place.
Yeah. Like I at first when the short starts, I really thought we were in the mind of a serial killer until it starts
Right.
to like you kind of created that vibe. I was really impressed by the two different versions of Jack that you were able to create. One is very effortlessly cool and knows what to say, and the other one is just a warrior and jumps to conclusions.
Yeah.
So I wanted to know, how are you able to create these identities to actually give us insight into the way like this type of anxiety can literally consume someone? Like he takes on different identities.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that this like those two identities kind of have been with me for so long that I got kind of used to them. You know what I
Hmm.
mean?
Yeah.
Uh, like even when I was a kid, like sixth, seventh grade, when you're like, the way my school worked is there were like five public schools, and
Okay.
then in sixth grade they all combine into one. And so I like vividly remember that first day, like going into school, being like, okay, what am I gonna say? What if it goes wrong? Like,
Hmm.
and so really like the worry Jack version of it.
Hmm.
And I remember my remedy for it was kind of like just pretend to be cool. And they
Hmm.
were so stuck, and neither of them felt they were both me, but it wasn't as like it wasn't authentically as me as I felt. It's almost like two of the political parties where it's like I don't feel seen by either of these. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, and so like I realized as I kind of went through life, I always thought it was like a really neurotic way to split up my consciousness. You know what I mean? To have these
Yeah.
two flip sides, right?
Yeah.
And what'd you say?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. I was agreeing. Sorry.
Yeah, and like, oh, sorry. uh, and for like the longest time, basically until adulthood or like at least college, I
Yeah.
always thought of it as like an impediment. You know what I mean? Where it's like, oh, I'm such a weirdo. Like, who else
Mm.
is doing this? I'd see people operating in real life and I'd be like, that's what I want. I want to just do my laundry like you're doing. You know what I mean? Like, everyone I'd see it would seem like all they're focused on was the task that they were doing, which is obviously not the case. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And as I started getting into more social social events like, parties in college or like basically anything, I noticed I started being pretty good at picking up other people in the same headspace where like I'd be in a conversation, a circle of people, and I could tell when someone was going down that rabbit hole. You know what I
Wow.
mean? And it was like, oh wow, like it was very freeing and almost like a empathetic and relatable thing where it was a experience where like I could be like, I know exactly what's happening to them, and also I'm not the only one. You know what I mean? It's just something that people don't really talk about, especially as we were growing up. Like I was born in the '90s, so like nobody's talking about being like, I'm really anxious right now, and I wonder what
Yeah.
that's about. Like that wasn't something that, and I'm glad it's different now, or at least getting there, right? So as I like entered therapy and realized it almost became something, I started seeing it as much as like I can't believe I'm gonna relate Lord of the Rings to this, but I am. Where like Frodo having the ring is always this burden, but it can also be something of a superpower and a way to relate to people. You know what I mean? All of a sudden, I'd find myself having conversations with people who were in that same headspace and us immediately relating like that because it's something people want to talk about, and it's almost like a taboo thing.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I was also born in the 90s, and you learn to fight these anxieties because you feel it's not normal.
Yeah,
And then once you clock, it's not
right.
just you. It's a lot easier to show up as your authentic self instead of pretending to be something you're not. And I think,
Yeah, and it's like an
yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just saying it's like an olive branch for you to relate to other people.
Hmm. Sometimes even anxiety, like one of the things I appreciated about the short is that it can actually come from a pressure to perform. He's invited to this party by his coworkers, and he's put all this pressure on himself that nobody's actually put on him. And so the
Yeah.
more he messes up, he's like, "Oh my God, I'm such a disappointment. I'm such a freak." And it's like, how were you able, like, how does Jack's insecurities, how were you able to like show that in terms of how he starts to see like other people?
I think that's a great question. I think that was what the device of the TV really helped
Mhm.
because it kind of killed a few birds with one stone. Where it's like, it's basically Jack's POV. I ended up not choosing to film it as his actual like eyeballs, as
Mhm.
opposed to something. It's general his general awareness in the space, you know. And the TV allowed me to like there's that point where he changes the channel, where the worried
Yeah.
one changes the channel and kind of
Mhm.
imagines what people are saying. So in a way, I by combining what's actually happening at the party on the TV with what could be happening in his head, like basically the worst case scenario, right? Like you kind of get to see the A to B to C to D mixed with Worry Jack's whole like, you're gonna you're gonna live in a dumpster. So you kind
Mhm.
of get to see how he catastrophizes, like all of us sometimes do, right? I like very recently I was going to a birthday party and I was late, right? And as I'm driving there, I'm like, what are people gonna think of me? Like everyone's gonna be mad because I'm missing the celebration, and it like hit me like, just like a ton of bricks, where it's like nobody's probably thinking about me at this party. If anything, I'm being egotistical, and
Mhm.
like I should just show up at the party to celebrate my friend,
Yeah.
right? And it's those avenues I think present themselves almost every day. The ability to kind of make it about you and kind of spiral off into your own world that's most likely not the case in
Yeah.
most scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, like even in the room, it's like he documents all of it and he keeps going
Yeah.
back to it, like rewinding it in his head over and over again. And towards the end, he is able to fight it. And
Mm.
then we discover he's not the only one, as you said. Poor Brian is going through the same
Yeah.
madness in his head. And I think what I appreciated was that there's different levels to this. Some people can fight it off and go back to the party. Whereas other people, it really does destroy them and they're not really able to actually function. And so for you, how do you actually stop your anxieties from limiting your life?
Honestly, I think it ends up becoming this, the way I like to think about it is like, is there a way to find it so it can be like the wind in your sails as opposed to the spit in your face, right? To
Mm,
bring up that story from before where it was like as I started recognizing, in college and early in life, people kind of heading down that same spiral in conversations after they'd said something, or maybe you could tell the conversation wasn't going well for them, or they obviously liked a person and they weren't getting the response, like whatever it was. I realized that, oh, if I didn't have this within me, I wouldn't be perceptive enough to see it in others. And
yeah.
I certainly wouldn't have the ability to relate to them about it.
Mm,
Like I remember uh one of my friends in, let's call it like eighth grade. I remember he was basically describing depression to me, being like, I'm just sad and I don't know why, right? And I
mm,
remember vividly because like now that I look back on it, I'm like, what were you thinking? I was just like, just be happy, just choose to be happy, as if
mm,
it's like one of those things that you can just turn on and off. And that's kind of how I was operating. It was like, I've got these crazy voices in my head, but I'm just going to choose to ignore them, which always kind of festered, right? And as I learned, like this short was a big help, but therapy as well, where it's like whether whatever what you resist persists, right? I,
yeah.
I always think in movies. That's just like kind of how my brain works. So like I have all these points. Like, are you a Harry Potter fan by any chance?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so
Yes, I am.
Devil's Snare.
I,
Like remember Devil's Snare and Harry?
yeah.
Like
Yeah.
they go, they beat the three-headed dog. They fall into those vines, and the harder you struggle, the more it constricts you. That's kind
Yeah.
of how I think about it. Where it's like I spent years and years, most of my childhood, a good amount of my early adulthood, trying to wrangle these voices and get them to do what I wanted and follow my lead and however you want to put it. When if I just let go and kind of work with them, they're a part of me. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, uh, know that it's gonna be okay as long as I'm there with them, right? It's not like I'm going and I have the knowledge and
Mhm.
the work that I've done. So just using them for basically good in a way. Like I use like the worry jack, to it's really good for writing. Like the spiral ability can really
Yeah.
I can take a situation as far as it needs to go,
You,
right?
you did. Yeah.
Um, but like also like what we were just talking about in terms of people, like I'm so not in line, but like I'm so well versed in the worried Jack voice because it's been such a big part of my life
Hmm.
that it's made me, I think, a little more sensitive and empathetic to when I see it happening in others. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? And it's not
Yeah.
like I'm going around therapy being like, talk to me about what you're doing. Like, I'm not doing that. Like,
Yeah.
it it it, it endears me to people
Yeah.
almost immediately. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it is a great thing to write about because it's a hard thing to talk about. If you don't go up to someone and be like, "Hey, nice to meet you. I'm Alec. I'm super anxious." Like
Yeah.
that's not
That's all
gonna
right.
work. Like, but if someone can already see it on you, or if someone sees it in me, it's an easier thing to kind of. It's almost like an emotional thing. It's either through the eyes or body language. You can kind of work your way there, and then from the false comfort side, which is what I called him in the script, by the way.
Yeah.
It's really good for like ego and knowing when to let go and things like that. Like it's same as the worry, Jeff. When I can see people spiraling, it's not too. There are signs where you can tell when people are, basically putting on a bravado, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or argue or something like that, where it's like, okay, this has nothing to do with me, right? Like this isn't. I'm not going to judge them, or I'm not going to like, oh, that person's being a jerk, kind of like how false comfort is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe maybe they're going through something. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it's easier for me to kind of just let go of it, right?
Yeah, and I think, towards the end, what he said, like, what if I say something? What if I mess up? Or what if I say something wrong? And she's like, so what? And as you were talking,
Right.
like, I think what struck me is like how personal the insults were, like you're
Mhm.
nothing, you're this, you're that. I don't think these feelings, as you said, they never go away. You just learn to manage them and accept them and distance that kind of personal, like that anger, that kind of lashing out. Like those voices get less judgmental. So a lot of what he was hearing was the worst of it. He was really in it.
Yeah,
Yeah, and like that type of like we really are our own worst enemies, and it's crazy how we can spiral ourselves out of our own, just we end up missing out on so much of life. And as you said, no one's thinking about it. They're thinking about what they're thinking about. But this is easier
right.
said than done. This is easier
I
said than
know. And that's like I think about it all the time. I read books about it. Like the three characters actually. So my therapist gave me this OCD book,
okay.
right? And in the book, there's three characters. There's false comfort,
Mm,
wise mind, and worried voice. So that's kind of where and it really resonated with me, that book. And so I just named the anxious one worried voice, worried Jack. The false comfort, I just named false comfort Jack. And the whole story is basically how Jack, us, anybody can slowly use these voices and learn to coexist with them so they can become the wise mind, right? And yeah, I mean, it's what I've noticed is one of my friends gave me this really great advice where like uh it's never a linear journey. You know what I mean? That's where I get tripped up a lot. Where like I'll have a good few days. I'll learn something, and
mhm,
I'll be like, oh, that's what I was doing. I got spiraled because of this, right? And then I'll write it down. I have a little journal of all the things I've learned after all the spirals, right?
yeah.
And the mistake you can make almost is like, okay, fixed it. You know what I mean? It's done now. Where it's almost, we're gonna be back in this hole eventually, always. There'll be another spiral. It's just how far out from your center are you gonna go? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Can you use your your past experiences to kind of calm yourself down and stay within your little emotional circle of like, okay, we've been here before. Like, go ahead and do what you need to do, but just trust me being you, like whoever we are, like that we know it's going to be okay and that we're not going to lose our minds and that we're not going to end up in a dumpster. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or someone's going to throw eggs at us or whatever it is.
Mhm. Yeah, like I think as you said, like what the scene when I wish it was as easy as just muting the voices. But the
Right.
other alternative is exactly as you said. There are ways to control it. You can read more about it. You can give yourself steps. And this is something that now we're slowly accepting instead of just pretending like it's not normal and pushing it down and trying to get on with
Yeah.
life.
I know, and like it always amazes me about the generations above us, right?
Oh,
Where like as this started happening with me, and like this all started like again, I've had these voices for forever, for as long as I can remember, right?
yeah.
But I didn't start like going to therapy and learning about anxiety. I just always thought I was a weirdo, you know what I
Mm,
mean? And
yeah.
so like once I realized it was like, oh, this is like a thing, right? Like this is the whole scope of mental health,
Yeah.
like people dedicate their lives to this.
Yeah.
Um, and it's so interesting to me. Like I always say, like if I wasn't a filmmaker, I feel like I would be in some kind of psychology because it's just so endlessly fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Um, but like you think of your parents, you think of the adults in your life as you're growing up, and like they have these ticks or they get angry really fast or they're like pushing, and you realize it's just these undiagnosed things that they never, because society wouldn't let them, you know what I mean, they had no choice but to just
Yeah.
right, and it manifests in like my dad gets controllers at the night and it's like I control the channel, right? I mean that's not my dad, I'm just using an example,
Yeah.
right? Like people control and however they can basically as a collateral damage from whatever's going on with them internally, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's exactly like you said. Like I remember I come from like African parents. They believe that depression is, you're African. There's no such thing as depression. Like these ideas are
Right.
just not, you got to push on with life. Okay. You're either weak or you're strong.
Exactly.
And anything less than that, they don't want to hear it.
Yeah, and like you gotta, that's the thing that's so interesting to me is the logic behind it is somewhat fair. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like you're
Yeah.
complaining, I'm sad. And they're like, people are dying.
Yeah.
There's war, like, and it's like, well, shit, when you put it like that, that makes me look like a wimp,
Yeah.
right? But it's all relative. You know this. Everyone knows this. Heartbreak, like on a scale of war and things like that. It's just like get over it, right? From by that logic, but that's not what it feels like. You know what I mean? Crisis feels like crisis.
Hmm.
Fight or flight is fight or flight, no matter what it is. Whether you're running from a T-Rex back in whenever, or when you feel like you're losing your mind, it's the same feeling.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I wish, as you said, this generation is a lot more aware of it. They're not willing to like throw their soul to it.
Yeah,
And a job and money, like these are not solutions. This is what we've been taught. Just
right.
get a job, like in Fight Club. Just get a
Yeah,
job, get married,
yeah,
get a
right.
life.
It's
Yeah.
insane. I mean,
It's
there's
like, no.
people I like anything. Like I know people who are like, it's time. I'm pretty unhappy, or like versions of unhappy. I'm kind of coasting. I guess it's time to settle down, get married, and have kids. It's like, don't bring kids into your unholy mess. Don't
Yes.
do that.
Yeah.
Like, and exactly what you're saying. It was
Yeah.
just distract, distract, distract.
Yeah, they're just like, just try it. It'll be a distraction.
Yeah, it's insane.
But as you said, like if you do the work, and I think once people are more aware that it is work and it is possible, that it's not something that magically goes away, then things become more
Yeah.
manageable.
Yeah. And that's something that I always feel like, again, I try. And that's another thing. Like, what are these voices like? It's always for ego and empathy. I think are the two biggest things you can learn is to try and
Mm.
remove yourself from whatever someone else is going through and like try and put yourself in their shoes where it's like, I have to go, like, who knows what they're going through? You don't know what's going on inside their head. You know what I mean? But I do. One of the big things, he doesn't seek help in this short version. There's a feature version where he does, but like I think what you said is so important, where it's like it is work. It takes time. Like people go to the gym to lose weight. You know what I mean? If there's
Mhm.
something going on, if you have a tick in your mind, whatever, and that already has negative connotations, and I don't mean it like that. You know what I mean? But like I think of it not too different than the gym, where it's like I have this repugnant OCD thing, right? That's what it's diagnosed as,
Okay.
and it's weird, right? Like at first I was like, oh, so you're saying I'm crazy? That's what you're saying? And they're like,
Oh.
no, I'm saying this is a thing. Um, quick side note, by the way, like I remember the first time I went to my I used to do like stand up about this. Uh, the first time I went to my therapist, she was like, "You have OCD." I'm like, "No, I don't tap. I don't do anything." She's like, "It's not that kind." And she's like, "I have a book for you." And she gives me the book, and the title is "When Life Falls Apart."
Oh
And I was
wow.
like, "Okay, this is a bit much." And of course, I read it, like changed everything. But like that's what I think is so important. You can sit and exactly what you said, like it's not going to magically go away. The knowledge itself and just knowing it's quote anxiety, I mean, that's good. Great, great first step. But self-awareness, I think, is the first step of a long, long journey that never ends. But you
Never,
can get
never.
to, like you were saying, a volume gets turned down, right? And that you can almost live in like a co-living space with them, right? As opposed to this like almost separate apartments in an apartment building, right?
Hmm.
Um, and that's what I would encourage, like whether it's therapy, whatever works for you. Some people, it's like I take a run and I just think about it, but finding your tools is what makes the difference. You know what I mean? And I think I think if there's more work to be done, it's like talking about it is great. That's what therapy is, obviously.
Mhm.
But find out what works for you. You know, it's a scary plunge, but take the plunge. Is it better than this? You know what I mean? Just like this constant, you're at the whims of these voices you have no idea are going to strike. That's terrifying.
It is terrifying. And it's really exciting once you start noticing it happening and you can step in, but that even takes a very long time to get to that point.
Yeah, it takes. I found this out. I started doing the therapy, and I've been off and on it because therapy is expensive,
Very, yeah.
but extremely like, and so, but like the first time I went to therapy and started the meds and the OCD thing was 2013,
Wow.
and I think I stopped in 2015, went back in 2018, and then I've been in it since 2018, a little bit on and off, just like as a cost thing,
Yeah.
until currently. You know what I mean? I've been with the same one for like 6 years now,
Yeah.
and like here, I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but this is this is my little list, right? And the top of it says for practice, not a test, right? And each one of these is a tool, right?
Oh, wow.
And each one of these tools comes from whether it's a week, a month, a day, it doesn't really matter. A lap around the track is what I call it, right? With
Mhm.
these ANSIs, where like I go in, I spiral, I'm like, this is the one that's gonna break me for sure. And like you obviously come out and you ask yourself, what did you learn this time? Is there anything I can take away from this that when I'm back on, when I, you know, start the lap again, I'll be like, let's just watch out for that. You know what I mean? And
Mm.
so now the fact that when a lap comes, I'm like, sweet. Like obviously I'm still anxious and scared and all of that, but like
Yeah.
there's a small portion of me now that's like, awesome. Time to get another tool. You know what I mean? Time to almost renew the nuptials, so to speak, right? Like where I, you know, it keeps me like it feels like as I'm saying, it keeps me humble. I realize the irony of that, but I'd feel almost a little weird without it. You know what I mean? Now at this juncture, where like if
Yeah.
I spent years of my life and I didn't go down, take a lap around the track at least once, you know?
Hmm. Yeah, I love what you said at the end. Like you're gonna mess up, and then you kind of
Yeah,
learn, like, oh, this is a new trigger. Or, oh, maybe I'll be more aware of this. And it's so unrealistic for people to think that they can stop being awkward, or they're never gonna make a mistake, or they're never gonna upset someone, or it's gonna happen. Just uh, t take it as a
just let it go.
lesson. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, do you watch The Bear,
Oh, I love the
the
bear.
FX for
Yes.
John Bernthal's thing? Just let it rip. Like, and I think the more we let it rip, the more we'll. That's what I love so much about that line, especially coming from him, given what his ultimate fate is, right?
Yeah.
Where he's trying to get Carmi to do what he didn't, right? Just let it rip. Like,
Yeah.
let us be ourselves. You're gonna be awkward. There's honestly, it's probably gonna be pretty funny,
Very
like
funny.
knowing, right?
Yeah.
Like maybe not in the moment, but eventually it'll be funny. Trust me. Like,
Yeah, I think with comedians, it's always interesting because your writing is so hilarious, and then when you find out what all these comedians go through, and you can't really write something truly, I think you have to be authentic. You have to know who you are and just let it. You can't be worried about other people's judgments. And you had so many lines in this short that really got me. I think my favorite was if ChatGPT was a person. And I swear that described me perfectly. Like you had so many one-liners, and I literally was laughing out loud. And so you said this would be a feature. So what do you hope
yeah,
people will take away from Shut Up, Jack?
honestly, I mean, that's been the best part about it. That was like the best part about on set is like seeing the different reactions. But exactly what you said is what I hope. You know, people see a little bit of themselves in there. They're like, oh, not just me. I'm not crazy or I'm not a weirdo. Like this happens to everyone, right? And like, you know, I think it's a little uh I can't think of the word, like a little egotistical to think that people are going to go seek help after watching this movie. But like you said, like, you know, just like even like bringing up the conversation like that we're having, right? Being
Yeah.
like, I do this. That's like, that's more than enough for me. because like I wish a seventh grade, a 10-year-old me could have watched this, or like Bo Burnham's eighth grade or anything in that realm and been like, nice. So I'm not alone. You know what I mean? That's the main takeaway is that you're not alone and that this isn't the end, right? Because that's the feeling that usually gets me in these spirals where it's like this is going to be the one that sinks me for good, right? Like this is going to be the one where I won't be able to get out of it, or like the spiral that I'll stay down, right? And that's the whole nature of the spiral. It's part of the process, like almost like a story arc where there's always going to be that low point. And just for people to know and or at least experience that with the right attitude and like, with the work, like you're saying, you'll always come back for air, you
Yeah.
know.
And where can people find you or support you if they want to know more about you, like a website or anything like this?
Yeah. So you got my website, which is this is the nice part about having a kind of a weird last name because
Okay.
it's just my name.com, Alec Bewkes. Like all of my email, like my email is my name at Gmail. I don't have to add any numbers or
Yeah.
anything. But so alecbewkes.com is where you can find like my previous shorts, some of my stand-up, a few web series that I've done.
Okay.
I have Instagram. It's it's Cool Hand Buke, like the movie, except the first my last name.
Okay.
Um, and you can find me on IMDb. But those would be the two main channels I would say, either my Instagram or go directly to my website.
Okay. Excellent. Well, Alec, I really enjoyed speaking with you today.
Me too. Thank you so much for reaching out.
And I hope you enjoy the festival.
Thank you. I hope so too. Fingers crossed, right?
No, it'll be fun. All right. Take care.